Hi, welcome to Hope in the Light of Suicide. I'm Tammy White, your host and the founder of the Bobby White Foundation, along with my co-host, Bonnie Snyder.
Hello. Good
And
morning.
we're twins.
We are twins today.
We both have our foundation t-shirts on. We want to thank everybody for joining us again. We want to thank John and Rob from WeBeam TV, as always. And to support us, if you want one of these lovely t-shirts, you could either contact me at the foundation office, phone or email, or you can go to our website here and purchase them. And you can pick them up locally if you're here from Gulfside Custom T-Shirts. They've partnered with us to help us with this. It's a fundraising kind of thing for the foundation and for our purple folders. And they can ship them to you anywhere in the world. He'll ship them anywhere for you.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. We really, along with, of course, WeBeam TV that, allows us to have this platform, but the partners who work with us as well, like Gulfside, Tim at Gulfside.
And Tim at Gulfside, also Kindness
Yes.
Network. We have a web page there that you can also donate to the foundation and help support our show. If you go to, there it is. There was a QR code up there. There it is. And you can just click on that QR code and it'll take you to that page. And there's, $5 up to, you want to sponsor the show for the whole year, that would be really cool. Or you can put in an amount that you feel comfortable with, and every dollar or quarter helps, so.
And also, too, if you do a lot of shopping on Amazon, if you go to Amazon Smile, as you're making your Amazon purchases, as many of us do, and you can pick the Bobby White Foundation as your charitable choice, and a percentage of what you've spent, goes to support the foundation, and that's, you're spending money anyway, because you're not really putting out any extra money. It's not like, I think of when I go, out to dinner sometimes or in the grocery store, and you get that prompt. Would you like to contribute to whatever? And my grocery bill is X amount of dollars, and then I'm adding on top of. Not that granted, I don't mind. I do this a lot. Add an extra, X number of dollars to, my grocery bill or whatever I'm purchasing at the time for whatever charity I'm applying to, sponsoring, or contributing to. Where with Amazon Smile, that is, whatever you spend is what you spend, and they are actually taking from their, quote unquote profit,
And they make a ton of money, but they also they donate and they support a lot of nonprofits.
Absolutely.
Throughout. So, and another way is our painting auction.
Lovely painting. I love this painting. We talked about this painting last week. And I'm like, let the bidding war begin. Tammy, tell us a little bit about the painting and the artist.
This painting was donated by a local artist, Carol T. Smith. She resides here in Trinity, and she titled the piece, which I think is very appropriate, "Hope Rains Down." And people are seeing a lot and are experimenting a lot these days with fluid art, and that's what this is. And she says here, the size of the piece is a 20 by 20 canvas. It's all ready to hang just as it is. It doesn't even need a frame. It's stretched on gallery bars, which are almost 2.5 inch thick stretcher bars, and the edges are painted, so it doesn't need a frame, which kind of sucks with my business because that's what I do. So you can frame it too if you want, but it's not necessary. It's the base. This is how she explains the painting. It's a base of turquoise was flooded on the canvas, then violet, magenta, Payne's gray, metallic copper, and 24 karat gold were randomly placed on top. Violet was then added to the top area and swiped down over the colors to form beautiful cells. That's what these little round thingies are. It's just so cool. And the painting is signed on the back by Carol.
That's a
And,
beautiful piece.
and like I said last week, wherever you hang this, I noticed this because I have it hanging in between shows at the foundation office. And I noticed throughout the day the way the light comes in to the room, the painting changes. And it is just so cool to watch. So you can go to the Bobby White Foundation Facebook page and find the post, and I'll reshare it so that it kind of tries to stay up at the top of the feed on Facebook. And all you have to do is put your bid in the comment section, and we'll run this through the end of this month and maybe have another piece next month. I think I'm going to try and get, we have shown pictures before, but the door that my nieces did for Art for Hope for the 3rd anniversary. We still have that door. And I think we'll bring it into the studio. And there's going to be some really cool things happening with the studio in the next couple months, next month or so. So stay tuned for that, because we got some like exciting things beginning to happen. And I'm excited.
Ditto.
So we finished up chapter 3 last week in our book that we've been sharing with you all, Processing Through Grief. Again, this too is available through Amazon if you want to, if you'd like to go through the book with us. As you know, we share the book and we share our experiences, with you. And again, your loss or your grief does not have to be suicide, overdose. It's any traumatic life event. All this is applicable to, right?
And then the way I like the way Stephanie Jose has this book laid out is it's a workbook.
Yeah, it is.
She guides you through exercises to understand your emotions as you recover from a loss. And like we said, even though the foundation of our show is suicide loss, suicide loss, a substance abuse loss. This is for any loss that, or what we talk about, is applicable to any loss that you, deal with, any traumatic event. Because a lot of times the emotions and the feelings and the grief process is the same.
It's very similar, even though the circumstances may be different. And particularly with what everybody has been going through the past year and a half with COVID, stress has increased, which makes traumas even that much more to deal with, So we're in this section of the book. This is part 2, emotions and reactions, and I want to read this little excerpt that she has.
On the same page. 'Cause I was thinking the same thing.
Awesome.
We've got to read this intro.
Yeah,
It is.
I mean this is really good. So, loss is a time of emotional chaos. Feelings do not come at convenient times or on a schedule. They can be intrusive, disruptive, and demanding of your attention. They can come barreling out of nowhere and leave you feeling exposed. Grieving is a time to turn inward and to embrace all of your feelings. This is not a time to interpret or judge them. Allow yourself to feel, because all of your emotions are normal. They are your body's message to you.
So true. And as I was reading that, I felt myself saying how she hit that topic squarely on the head. in that our emotions, come from nowhere, or I shouldn't say come from nowhere. They have, they come from a place, but they can come out of nowhere. I think is how I want to put it. And sometimes when we least expect it, if I think back, years ago, and I want to say this had to be early 90s. I'm thinking around 94-ish. If I'm not, first I can't get the year straight. My grandmother passed away. And very important person in my life. My grandparents, I was raised by my grandparents. And I remember, as I was going, went to the service, and I didn't cry. It was not, there were no tears. And I remember getting back, and I was talking to, a professional friend who, like myself, wasn't quite in the mental health field yet. I was still on active duty, so I was still in uniform. But I remember looking at her and telling her how guilty I felt because I didn't cry at, I called my grandmother Mama. I didn't cry at Mama's funeral. Like, what was going on? Like, how could I not cry? This, over this woman who, was an important woman in my life. My mother's, my mother is alive, and I have a relationship with my mom. Don't get me wrong. However, anyway, circumstances. I was raised by my grandparents. But anyway, I remember her telling me, Bonnie, that it's normal. When you least expect it, you will cry. The emotion will hit you, and sometimes it could be something that is absolutely unrelated to, that loss. And at the time, I worked at the disciplinary barracks, the jail, at Leavenworth, the military jail. I was on the working side, not on the inmate side.
You need to clarify that.
I do. Some people there, when I was like, I was in jail. I was like, I've been in jail for 35 years. And they were like, what? I was like, working. Just working. But anyway, I was working, the prison had a car wash. And I was in charge of the car wash. And I remember one of, the individuals that worked, that was on the team with me, I called him, he was my right-hand guy. He's my right-hand dude. I was in my office, and he came in, and you know how you go to car washes, they will spray a certain scent in your car. And we were out of, I don't know, like the new car scent. So I just remember him coming in, and he was like, "Hey, P," my last name was Phillips at the time. "Hey, P, we're out of new car scent. Do you want me to order some?" And I just remember looking at him, right? And his last name was Brown, so I called him B. Like, he called me P, I called him B. And I was like, oh, and the tears just like, you would thought Niagara Falls was coming out of my eyes. Yes, order it. It's okay. And I'm thinking to myself, what is going on here? Like, what's happening? And then I had to sit back and I thought about it. I wish I could remember her name, but I remember she said, when you least expect it, it will hit you. What it was about B asking me, can he order some new car scent because we were almost out or we were out, and my grandmother's death.
What was relatable?
I have no clue, but it did. It does bring into mind what she says here.
Exactly.
In that sometimes when you least expect it, and I felt myself not so much apologizing to him, but he was like taken aback, like, oh my God.
You're getting emotional for car scent?
About car scent. And I just looked at him and I was like, B, I don't know where that came from. And he's, we are still close to this day. He's a minister. He's, gone into ministry. It's an amazing singing voice, mind you. But he's like I said, he's in ministry. And, I just looked at him and I was like, I don't know. And then it hit me, and I remember telling him, I'm the loss of my grandmother just hit me at this time, and I don't know, I don't know why. But we find ourselves apologizing, and she'll get into it with our next, chapter. She talks about emotions where that guilt comes in, but I found myself feeling guilty and needing to apologize for crying. I'm sorry.
Well, and at the beginning of this chapter, chapter 4, she has a quote here by Vicki Harrison, which is exactly that. Grief is like the ocean. It comes in waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water is calm, sometimes it is overwhelming. All we can do is learn to swim.
And all you can do is learn to swim. Another good friend of mine, and I think you know him, Art. He's retired from the Haskell County Sheriff's Department.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about, yeah.
And I'm sure, Art will be okay with me sharing this here, because later, I talked about you today on the show. But Art lost the love of his life. And he, amongst my support after, Aiden and Patrick, would quote this. But I think instead of swimming, I want to say he said surf. So I see swim, surf being used interchangeably. And so as I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so right. And I find myself referencing back to this quote quite frequently, especially when, as we talked about, on our last show where we talked about triggers and, sometimes, these events that come up that evoke all these emotions in us. And so, sometimes I will, like with Patrick's birthday coming up, for instance. Oh my goodness, it's Patrick's birthday. I'm thinking back last year, and, I'm in a funk right now. I'm doing this here. And Art will either, on my social media page, or he'll private message me. Remember, you know how to swim. Or remember, you know how to surf. And then, likewise, he was going through something, I want to say it was the anniversary, of her loss. And, he was like, I'm really struggling, I really miss her. And, again, love of his life. And I remember private messaged him, remember, Art, you were the one who taught me how to swim. And so, I'm getting emotional. But yeah, that is so fitting, that sometimes, it is important for us to sit back and learn, that is such a nice metaphor into how do you navigate the ebbs and flows.
Well, and she says here too in the second paragraph, after a loss, your mind and body need time to reorganize themselves. Yep. And that is so true. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to kind of let that happen. Mm-hmm. I think it could be, I know it, believe me, I know it's difficult, but it can be hard to let ourselves let that happen naturally, especially with the stresses of everyday life, mm-hmm. And after your significant loss, everybody goes back to their normal lives, or what their normal is, and ours isn't anymore.
And it's funny because as I sit back and I look at that very thing where we're processing through what does life look like after a loss, and fast forward or rewind to last week, we were in a staff meeting. Our staff meetings are still virtual. But I forget what we were talking about, and one of my coworkers, who's also a friend, we're texting back and forth, as we sometimes do in these meetings. I think, guys, we do pay attention.
I was going to say, yeah, they're really paying attention.
Yeah, we do pay attention to what's going on. At the same time, I forget. Anyway, the meeting was, she sent a text to me. Hey, I'm going to shut my camera off for a second. And I'm like, okay, so this, way, in the course of the meeting, I knew not to, like, call her out or whatnot. And what she was going through was, it was the day of this meeting was okay, I want to say it's 3 years, was the third anniversary of, the death of a friend of hers. She lost her, by, it was an overdose. But she was like, today is the anniversary of her friend, and we knew of the friend, and she was like, I thought it was going to be okay, but I'm not. And just as this says, it comes in waves, stabbing and flowing, where 1 minute she's perfectly fine and we're in this meeting, to the next minute I got to get off this call for a second. And as we're talking back and forth, like supporting each other for this meeting, she was like, and if anybody understands what I'm going through right now, it would be you. And I was like, yeah, I'm with you, because Pat's birthday's coming up. So in recognizing and putting ourselves into some type of relative norm, we can do that. You're right. How many times have you heard people, we talked about this in previous shows, how many times have you heard people say, I'm still going to be with you. If you need me, just call. And I think back to in the early beginnings, where, people are at the house, people are dropping by, people are calling, people are checking in, and then little by little, it drops off. Not so much that I don't think they think she doesn't need us anymore, or the support is not needed.
Well, I don't think it's not a conscious thing.
No, it's not.
It's
not.
It's not.
Because I have to sit back and think, even us being on this side of the aisle, how many times have we done it?
Mm-hmm.
I sit back and I think of, friends who have, suffered a loss or going through things, and it's like, hey, I'm here if you need me, and I'll, hey, I just want to check on you, see if you're okay. And I've asked myself, when is the last time I called so-and-so?
Right.
When is the last time I reached out to so-and-so? So I can't be, I can, but, I find it would be a little hypocritical to, you guys said you were going to be with me when I needed you, and you're not. Oh, wait a minute. Didn't we say those same things? Yes.
Yeah. Well, in this section, which she had, it's sadness,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one thing that has really gripped me
Mm-hmm.
with this whole thing, and again, we've talked about it. If something happens and that weight is lifted for a short period of time, and then you feel guilty about it, but that's the sadness is what I struggle with, even still today. There's more times that I am happier, and actually when I felt it the first time, it was like, oh my gosh, I forgot how good this feels. But then slip right back into the sadness, and I still have that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this interesting. She has in here, what does sadness look or feel like? And I can probably hit almost every single one of these bullet points.
I think for me, I tend to, when I'm in that funk, the confusion or inability to concentrate,
Mm-hmm.
or there are times that I know there are things that I have to get done, and they don't happen. Like I look at, whether it is a project around the house, it's like, how long have I been working on the garage? Or I will clean the garage, and again, we've talked about this like over and over.
Constantly cleaning the garage.
Yes, I will clean the garage and then destroy the garage just so I can go back and clean it. And I asked myself, am I doing this consciously or am I doing this subconsciously? Because that was our thing. Pat and I would clean the garage, and then a week later, we're like, didn't we just clean the garage? But, I also find, and this is kind of one of those things to look at, paperwork. Like, a lot of paperwork that's involved with my work. And I'll find myself, oh my gosh, I didn't do my paperwork today. And it's not that I didn't think about it. It gets lost. Or I find myself, on my phone on one of those apps. And the new one I found was, what's it called? Bricks, Balls, Crusher or something like that. But it's a game where you have to take this ball and break all these bricks. And I find myself, you've been on this game for 2 hours, and like losing time. Like this 2 hours that you've been on this app on your phone, this Brick Crusher, Phase 10, or, back in the day it was Candy Crush. The time that you've spent on Candy Crush or Matchington Mansion, to name a couple, you could have been focused on something else or starting something and becoming distracted, and then not going, I didn't finish that. Did I remember? And I think, I don't want to create the illusion that I forgot I started it. But it's, my brain like bounces all over the place.
Yeah, I find that too, especially the concentration has still been difficult, and it's a weird feeling, especially when I really never was that way before, and it's kind of too, and I've found, and it's a real thing, and they name it different things, I guess, possibly because of whatever your grief is, but it's a form of brain fog. And I came across something I was reading, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and they called it widow's fog. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a real thing, and this is happening. But yeah, it's I can feel sometimes a little bit more coming out of it a little bit more, and wishing more often than not to be able to stay in that space, because it feels good to be happy.
It does,
But then you just fall back into the sadness.
Because I think, unfortunately, what happens with, some people is, we find ourselves, in a happy place, doing, engaging in something, and it is pleasurable. And then that guilt, tends to creep in. Why am I happy? I'm not supposed to be happy. What's going on here? Like, how dare you be happy when this person, or this event happened in your life that is supposed to be, or as some people interpret as, you're supposed to be sad for life now because this person is gone. And, we talk about, Stephanie Jose talked about it in this book, and Dr. Wolfe talked about it in his book, where, granted, you're always going to have that piece of you missing in the person that you lost. It's important that, you do recognize that you're still alive. We talked about that cliche. They would want you to be happy.
Right.
They would want you to carry on. They would want you to, and where, I know sometimes for me, I fight with that, because I find myself, I remember, saying it, something similar, to Kira or anybody else who's, has lost somebody, to it. That's the dumbest thing I've ever said, At the same time, I had to sit back and was like, well, no, 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 no. It's not so much that it was the dumbest thing that I ever said. It is, those words are in a different, I can put them in a different perspective now, you know. So I can say, you know, yes, where, you know, Patrick and Aiden and, you know, even Bobby, they're not suffering with, you know, whatever, you know, depression or mental illness that they were dealing with, you know, or, you know, I hate to say mental illness, but it is what it is. You know, they're not dealing with whatever was troubling them on a mental health, you know, side of the spectrum. They weren't, you know, they're no longer dealing with, you know, what may have been troubling on the physical side, you know, with, you know, Bobby and
Like
MS.
with Bobby's MS, yeah.
They weren't, you know, struggling with, I don't want to burden on anybody, or, you know, I think in, you know, Patrick's case and Abe's case, you know, does any, you know, I have a hard time believing that the people who say they love me, do they really, really love me? You know, or, you know, what is it about really? I can't find a good relationship. And it's like, okay, you're right. I get it. They're not dealing with those struggles anymore. And you know, is that you know, is that how we want to look at this loss in a positive manner? Depends. You know, I look at you and say, I can process that. Doesn't make it any better. But at the same time, you know, understanding that, you know, in the words of, you know, a family member, you have other children and grandchildren that are still here, that are depending upon you. And I know the intention was pure, or I understand the intention behind it. Some people took offense to how it was worded. What are you saying to them? That you keep your focus on Patrick, who's gone. What about everybody else? And I'm like, I understand what you're saying. Some people can't turn that switch off very
Right.
easily. You know, at the same time, understanding it's okay to be happy. It's okay to continue to live. It's okay to, you know, to carry on. It's okay to miss the person that you miss that's no longer here. You know, it's okay to mourn the loss. It's when it becomes all consuming and it takes over everything else, every other aspect of your life. That's when it becomes
An issue, yeah. And I have found recently, and I've had to force myself to do this, but it, for the most part, it has worked. Because when you're around people and you're just so sad, it has an effect on other people too, and how they interact with you. And I started doing this recently because one of my networking groups, we started meeting in person again.
Uh-huh.
And I told myself, I'm going to go in there, whether I feel like it or not, and be happy and be light. And eventually, it's just there. And I've noticed a difference for myself when I do that. And it's like, even if I have to force myself, within just a short period of time, it could just be minutes. It's natural for that time that I'm with these people. You know, they're loving and caring, and you know, we're there to help each other, and it feels good and it feels light. And I've done it even on a couple of our meetings, our Zoom meetings with another networking group that I'm actually I'm a member with them, with the foundation, where everybody else has these, their insurance or mortgage broker or, banker or financial person, and I'm the one that's bringing suicide to the table every week.
If I'm not mistaken, Tammy, I think we're in one of those same networking groups where I think the one that I'm in,
Yeah, it's
you
reversed.
are
I'm the
there
gallery.
as the gallery.
Right.
And I am there for,
You're bringing substance
mental-
abuse. Yeah, mental health and substance abuse.
And it's
exactly.
like, I'm not selling you anything. you know, you know, there's, which I think is interesting about this line of work and talking about these kind of topics, is because when we have someone who is one of our mortgage brokers, for instance, at the end of the day, the tangible thing that you have in your hand is the house
Right.
that you're now living in. When we are talking to our, one of our banker friends, the tangible thing that you have in your hand is the Benjamins, as the kids would say, the
Right.
money that is in, that whatever, net amount that is in your bank account. When you're coming to somebody with this topic of, suicide or mental health, the issue becomes, what is the tangible thing that I have in my hand? And because, it isn't something that I can look at as, it's this piece of paper, it's this book. People are like, well, that doesn't apply to, how does that apply to me? Except for when when I approach it, I was like, okay, well, if you're happy and you're upbeat and you're enjoying what you do, the likelihood is you're going to go out, let's just say your profession. You're going to do your profession, and you're going to do your profession because you're motivated to do so, because your mental health is okay. And I don't know about you, but I love what I do, don't get me wrong. But I jokingly, as I'm talking to any group, I was like, I work because I'm a typical female. I like to shop, and my two favorite stores is you refer to them as the big box stores, those home improvement stores, and shoes. Okay, silly shoe collection. Well, in order to buy shoes, and if I stick on shoes for a minute, I'm a typical female. I like shoes. In order to buy shoes, I have to have money. Well, in order to have money, I have to work. Well, what do I need in order to work? I need to be in the right mental state in order to work. Because if I'm going in and I'm unable, because I'm dealing with something to focus on my work, then work is going to suffer, and then eventually, all right, Bonnie, you need to pull it together, or you're going to be unemployed. So when you look at it, that's that is the tangible thing to look at. Or if I go home and I'm in a funk, that I neglect doing things that's required around the house. I don't know about you, but I have an issue about things in the house being out of place. So if I happen to, if I'm at a spot where I don't care if there are dishes in the sink, I don't care if the laundry is done, I don't care if my bed's made, I don't care if I vacuum. After a while, it's kind of like I'm living in this pigsty, because, my mental health is not on track where it's like, okay, wait a minute. Now, like for me, yard work, housework, laundry, is how I, people like, you're strange. I recharge my batteries. You like doing laundry? Well, yeah, there's something cathartic in doing laundry. There's something cathartic in washing the floors. There's something cathartic in doing housework. That's my, thing. I'm a weirdo.
Mine is a little housework, a little bit, but I find that once I do complete those, I would kind of say menial tasks that you got to do to have a decent place to live. It feels good that I even if you're in a funk, you accomplish something, even if it's something little. The bigger things for me is like doing the yard work, or redoing the gardens and doing whatever it is in our place outside, because that used to be Bobby's job. Bobby took care of the outside, And mind you, I have an acre and a half of land to take care of by myself. I mean, to mow my lawn, for me, he could do it in a whole day. He could mow and weed whack. For me, it takes at least 2 days, you know. But it makes me feel good. You know, even something as, I don't know, hopefully I can still do this for a long time, getting up on the roof and blowing the leaves off the roof. It feels good. And actually, when I'm up there, I'm like, hey, see, hon, I did it again. You know?
Oh yeah, I mean it's one thing to be able to take a step back and look at what I accomplished today. When I think of when I look at my fence, I have privacy fence around my property, and it's wooden, and I look at like this one particular post that Pat and I replaced together, and I look at that post and I was like, that's one of the last projects he and I did together. And I was like, all right, I got to replace this post now. And, you're right. I love the idea, or there's something calming in, as I'm doing this, hey, bud, or I used to call him my little monkey. Hey, my little monkey, I kind of wish you were here helping me with this post, but I got this, or, of course, walking in the house and looking at, hey, what up, son? Again, allowing yourself to not be consumed with the sadness, allowing yourself not to let the grief overwhelm you, finding pleasure in certain things, or finding pleasure in things, using projects, as in ways that are cathartic.
And even just those little moments of happiness or accomplishment, that can take you a long way, you know.
Okay.
And I hold on to those a lot, and and again, sometimes you have to force yourself to do it. But then once you do it, it's like, I did it again, you know. And when I'm doing stuff around, particularly around the yard, it's like, hon, you should be doing this. But look, I did it. Are you proud of me? I'm constantly having sprinkler issues, and I still have another, our one last sprinkler line to put in. It's like 6 or 7 heads that need to be put in, and then when I get that done, I'm gonna have to redo the 2 different boxes that we have for them, and this was quite frankly a project that we started probably 25 years ago. Because it was something that we were doing on our own. We got the first 4. There's 6 different zones, so we got the first 4 zones in, and then poof, I guess interest was lost. And when my aunt came down to stay with me when I was going through a pretty severe bout of depression a couple of years ago, I always wanted to redo the very, very front in front of our house. We have a big circular driveway, and it gets so much sun in that area. So in order to do the landscaping, I needed water there, like easy. And so I was like, okay, let's see what it's going to take to get this zone in. And we had all the parts and pieces this whole entire time. I didn't even have to purchase anything except for fresh PVC glue. And I went in and I put that entire zone in myself and got it all hooked up. And now I have this lovely front yard that I get to maintain easier. But, it's this, even though it is so difficult at times, and even if it just lasts for a moment or two, the feeling of joy and accomplishment, like I said, it can carry you a long way. And it'll start to flow a little bit more. You're not to say you're still going to have your setbacks, just like we said, with the cycles of grief. It's not going to be, I'm going to continue to get better and better and better, and I'm not going to have a setback, because you will have. you will have.
You know, the other thing I find too when we're dealing with, grief and sadness and our own particular emotions, especially, if, focusing on, sadness for a moment, is, if I find myself amongst people and I'm always, sad, depressed, and down, people will, naturally, gravitate to you and try to do what they can to, make you feel better, help you out of the funk. Eventually, however, I feel that people tend to, I don't know what to say anymore. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm not helping. And unfortunately, it may even get to a point to where, people may say, I'm making matters worse. And so therein sets up a potential that people will pull away from you, not engage with you a lot because it's like,
You're
I
always
wanna-
so sad.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
do you think it's that, or do you think it could? I mean, partly be they pull away because you're sad all the time, and I can't do that.
I see it as it could be a combo of two. It's like this person is sad. Let's think about let's take it off of sadness for a minute. And think about the person who is mean spirited. After a while, you know what? I have no
Right.
desire to hang around with this person anymore because they are so negative. They're so mean spirited. So I'm going to steer clear of them. Let me be around people who are happy, upbeat, and more like me. Or more like I want to be. Like, I want to be in a happy state. Let me be around happy people. I don't
Right.
want to be around, Mr. Grumpy Pants, Mr.
Right.
and Miss Grumpy Pants over here. And I want to say the same thing happens when we're dealing with, people who are sad that, or that are in this, depressive state. It is not so much that we want to pull away because we don't care.
Right.
It is, all right, they're depressed. I'm not helping. And so therefore, I'm going to take a step back since I can't help. I'm not going to, sit and contribute to, the cause. And there are other people who, when I look at people who, it's their mission, just have that natural knack to make people feel better. It's like, wow, there should be more people like that. I'm thinking specifically of, my best friend. I should get his truck back today.
Oh, the one you
The
were.
truck, yeah. But I remember, having a conversation with him because, if I sit back and I think about, again, going through this emotional state, and as we said, we were talking about this, grief and loss can come, with anything. And in this particular case, I'm grieving the fact that I just wrecked my friend's truck, And, so when I put it in the shop Monday, I put it in the shop on Monday. I'm fixing this scratch in your truck. As, he gets up early like I do. So he, texts me, I'm outside, he's in his driveway. And I was like, okay, I said, I'm going to put this, and he looks at me, just chuckling, because I was getting kind of used to the scratch. And, now, what does that have to do with this? What does that have to do with what we're talking about? But it made me think about, I was getting used to the scratch. And it makes me think about there's an imperfection in this truck that wasn't there before. I'm getting used to it. In other words, it's okay. There's a scratch in the truck. I can live with this. I can get used to this scratch. The same way where using this scratch as it applies to, I'm not happy, or I say we're not happy about this loss that we have, encountered in our life. However, I get used to it. It's always going to be there. There's always going to be a reminder. Yeah, I go get, the truck out of the body shop. They're probably going to, probably will have matched the paint perfectly. You don't see this, 13-inch gash, anymore in the door. But at the same time, we know that gash is still there, So much like fixing a scratch in the door, things, mechanisms that we put in place to where, you know what, it's glossed, it's repaired a little bit. We get used to it and carry on.
Well, and you had mentioned that at the beginning of the show, with this book, it's like a workbook, and in this section here, for sadness, she has this area that for you to write in, and it's, until someone is gone, it is often difficult to know how we are going to be affected. Identify what struggles you are now facing after the loss, and it's, the hardest part about losing you is, and then she has this section for you to write out your feelings. And that's one of the ways that she has in here, as far as ways to deal with your sadness or cope with it, is to think and write about the person.
Yeah, when I think about, again, when I think about Patrick, and I was like, the hardest part about losing you is, every time I look at Devin, and, I'm, looking at, like, some of his mannerisms and even, some of his behaviors. And mind you, in school, some of his, behaviors have manifested as, some negative behaviors, smacking out. And in my brain, I'm processing, if Daddy were still here, we would be going through this. And I found where, I just recently found out this, because had I known about this, when he was in school, I had a teacher, one of his teachers, would look at him and say, would your father be proud of you? What would your father say if he saw you acting this way? And I'm like, your teacher said what? And he said for him, that was triggering. You're asking me, how would my daddy feel about this? When, for him, the hardest part is Daddy's not here to address the behavior. Daddy's not here to, look, dude, why are you being a leader? Like he meant to come up. I'm being a follower, not a leader. Daddy's not here to have these conversations with you. I think about how he processed, the initial, hearing the initial, fast forwarding to, to now. But yeah, I love how she, gives us information, and then puts the opportunity, or presents the opportunity. Now I want you to apply what I've just written about.
Yeah, you can apply and process it.
Yes.
It helps you process everything a little bit more. And yeah, that's what I like about this book too. And Dr. Wolfelt has one too that we'll bring when we get done with this one here. It's actually a book and a separate workbook.
Yes.
And I've gone through it, and I'm gonna probably go through it several times. But we want to bring that to you too. But yeah, it does help. And I haven't filled out that section yet, because I have a really hard time with this, because there's just so much. There's just so much that I miss about losing him. We used to have a running joke, and it started well before we were even married, that because I want to live to be 100, and so Bobby is 8 years older than me. So I told her, you have to live to be 108. And then we had this little deal, this'll happen when we hit this age. And now he's not going to be there. I still plan on living to be 100, hopefully, but I'm not going to have my best friend with me.
Right.
And he would have been retired by now, and we could have been doing things together. And I'm not going to be doing those things with my best friend.
As we wind out, I mean, time gets away from us.
It does every time. We barely even touched on this.
Exactly. Actually, we touched on more than what we did.
Yeah.
But as always, as we we close it out, to again, thank you, Reading TV, Rob and John, and you guys, our viewers. Make sure that if you're suffering or you need help, there are resources out there. Whether it is a mental health professional, an organization, you're not in this alone.
No,
No
you're
one's
not.
in this alone.
The National Suicide Prevention Hotline, please put that number in your cell phone, because you never know when somebody might need it.
And remember,
There's always hope. And again, thank you.